Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. It is a pleasure to be learning with you all as part of, what is now technically Elul's Man at Drisha. Welcome to the fifth and final session of Mishnah in Depth, Bava Kamma. Mishnah in Depth, Bava Kamma is a project of Drisha's Rifka Rosenwein Mishnah Division and is sponsored in her memory by her family. We have had the pleasure of learning these past several weeks with Rabbi Alex Israel every Sunday, working with the most standard daily Mishnah study schedule with a group of committed learners who are studying Mishnah Yomit on their own daily, and over a period of weeks and months, we will complete Tractates and possibly even Orders of Mishnah. For Rabbi Alex Israel is an educator and author. He teaches primarily in Israel. He was born and raised in London, received his smicha in Israel, studied at Har Etzion, and he has published on Sefer Malachim, as well as records a 929 podcast. And with that, I want to hand things over to Rabbi Israel.
Okay, hello. How is everybody? I hope we're all well and having a good day. Always find the dissonance between Sunday evening here in Israel and Sunday lunchtime in America quite jarring. We've already started our work week and you're still in your sort of Sunday, relaxed schedule. So it's always sort of funny to think that we're sort of in different modes, but there we go. I will start off because I'll forget to say it at the end, but thank you very, very much to everybody. Thank you to Drisha. Thank you to all of you for attending and for giving me the opportunity to review Masechet Bava Kamma and the concepts there. This has been fun. And without further ado, we're going to jump into our topic. We've been learning Bava Kamma. We spent 3 shiurim, 3 of our classes, studying chapter 1 to 6, which were the Avot Nizikin, the classic 5 categories of damage, property damage, where my property can damage anything else. Then last time we actually dealt with human damage. And there's another type of human damage which we're going to deal with today. And that is if I misappropriate something of yours, if I pickpocket you, if I steal from you, if I, take something which belongs to you. And this covers, in terms of Bava Kamma, this is chapter 7, 9, and 10, are dedicated to something we call, 2 categories. One is called Gneva. Gneva, Ganef, you've probably heard of that in Yiddish or in Hebrew or whatever. A Ganef and a Gazlan. Right? And the Gazlan also is some sort of robber. Now, what I want to try and do in the first half of our class today is to talk a little bit about the difference between Ganav and Gazlan. And that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to share my screen so people can see well. And you also have in the chat, you have the source sheet, the same source sheet. So what I want to try and explain is that, what we'll do is we'll maybe start off with this first Mishnah and understand some of the properties of this feature of Ganav and Gazlan, and then we'll go back to the Psukim. Maybe let's actually start off just to prove my point. In Parshat Kedoshim, source 1 that you see on the screen, Vayikra chapter 19, Leviticus 19. Notice here, Vayikra 19 is the parsha of Kedoshim. It's got a whole potpourri of different laws you're familiar with. For example, Mipnei Seva Takum, stand up for the elderly, or another mitzvah there is V'havta l'reacha kamocha. And in this list, earlier on in the parsha, it says, Lo tignovu, do not steal, okay? And in there it continues, it says, Lo tekachashu, do not deny, right? Do not deal deceitfully or falsely, don't lie to one another, okay? This is not talking about a lie, like, did you go shopping this afternoon? You say, no, I was watching TV. Here we're talking about things when you're actually being deceitful in business. And it says, V'lo tishavu b'shmila sheker, don't swear falsely by my name. V'chilalta Hashem Hashem Elokecha, ani Hashem. profaning the name of God. Now, usually would swear in a business situation, because the question is, you want somebody to be true to his word, and the way that in a society which was very God-fearing, you would try and have somebody to swear on God's name, and then they would be afraid to take God's name in vain. So you mustn't swear falsely by God. And then it says, Lo ta'ashok et re'echa. Do not defraud your neighbor, or do not commit fraud. V'lo tigzol. Now, gezel, right, is also a type of robbery. Here, you shall not commit robbery. V'lo talim sachir itchad boker. And don't withhold somebody's wages. And the question is, of course, what is the difference between you shall not steal and you shall not commit robbery? Right? What exactly is the difference? Okay. And that's what I want to examine today. Now, it's very clear that the laws of Geneva are in Bava Kamma, chapter 7. And the laws of Gzela are in Bava Kamma, chapter 9 and 10. And I want to try and use today to deal a little bit with the differences between them. But here already what we've established is that the psukim themselves already make a distinction. In a minute, we're going to go to look at the psukim in more detail, and we're going to look at the Talmud. So in order to understand, let's go look at our first Mishnah. This is where we're up to. Last time we studied chapter 8. We're backtracking to chapter 7, but I hope that's okay. Meruba midat tashlumei kefel midat tashlumei arba v'chamisha. Interestingly enough, it's a curious, we all know that something multiplied by 4 and 5 is more than something multiplied by 2. X times 2 is less than X times 4 or X times 5. So what's going on? And they say more encompassing is the rule of twofold restitution than the rule of fourfold or fivefold restitution. We'll explain this in a second, but let's keep going. Shemidat tashlumei kefel, if you're talking about twofold restitution, that's what we call kefel. Like kaful. Kaful means double. Or kaful, if you fold a piece of paper into 2, then that's called kaful. Okay? So it says kefel noheget bein b'davar sheyesh bo ruach hayim or bein b'davar she'ein bo ruach hayim. If you steal something and you get caught, so let's say, for example, there was a robbery and I stole somebody's laptop, and then the police get a tip-off that the cell phone is in my property or the laptop, and they raid my house and they find the laptop. So I am obligated to pay double, 2 laptops. That's the rule of the Torah. You pay double. And that applies whether I stole somebody's pet rabbit, whether I stole their cow, whether I stole their laptop, or stole money. However, right, midat tashlumei arba v'chamisha, there's a rule of 4-fold or 5-fold restitution, and that only applies to an ox or a sheep, for it is written, and now they're going to quote from Exodus chapter 21, verse 37, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. So we have the rule of tavach u'machar, which is arba v'chamisha. Put it very simply. If you went into somebody's barn and took their sheep and took it out and put it in your own barn, and then you were found out, they would make you pay double. However, if you actually sold it on, or if you slaughtered it and ate it for dinner, and it was discovered and they found it on these closed circuit television cameras, you would actually pay not double, but 4 or 5 times. If it was an ox, 5 times. If it's a sheep, 4 times. Okay? If I stole from a thief, I don't pay double. So this is the question of Gonei v'achar haganaf. I'm not going to deal with that. But what we've established is that the law of gneva is that you pay double if you're found out, or 4 or 5 times. Okay. However, the law when we are looking at gezel is, and here, sorry, please, I hope I'm not going to make you dizzy. But let's look at the Mishnah that I put at the end. Hold on a second. Yeah. Look at chapter 9, Mishnah 5. Hagozel, and here notice the language is gozel. Hagozel et chavero shaveh pruta. If I took any item, v'nishbalo, I swore to you that I didn't have it. You came to me and said, "Do you have my laptop?" And I said, "No." What do I have to do? I have to return it to you. Yolichena acharav afilu lemadai. I have to go and return it to you, even to, as far as media. I need to go all the way from the land of Israel to Chutz La'aretz. Get on a plane to New York, right, and bring it back to you. Lo yitein lo livno v'lo lishlucho. I've got to personally return it. Aval notein l'shliach beit din, but you can give it to an agent of the court. V'met yachzir l'roshav. In other words, here, when it comes to Gazlan, there is no kefel, there is no arba v'chamisha. That is the rule. Okay, I'll give you one other example. Yes, look in the last Mishnah on the sheet, chapter 10, Mishnah 6. Hagozel chavero, if a man stole something from a friend, or shelavahu menu, or shefkid lo ba'yishuv, if I stole something from you in the city, right, or I lent you something, or shefkid lo, you gave me something, lo yachzir lo b'midbar, right? You can't go, let's say he's out, he's a shepherd. You don't go and give it to him out in the countryside. If he bought a spade in order to take it out to his field, then you can return it to his field. But if it's something for home use, you can't. My point is that when you're a Gazlan, you have to return the object. Suddenly, Geneva has all these rules of double and 4 and 5. What exactly is going on there? Let's go back to the verses and establish establish what's going on here. I'm going back to the first page of our source sheets, and then we'll try and explain it. The source for stealing is in Shemot, in Parshat Mishpatim, Shemot chapters 21 and 22. It starts like this: Ki gnov ish shor oseh. If somebody steals an ox or a sheep, or tzvacho or macharo, and if he slaughters and sells it, chamishar b'ashchai yeshalem tachal hashor, arba tzon tachal haseh. You have to pay back 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. Right? However, if you keep on reading through the text, imi matzeti matzei biyado agneva mishor ad chamor ad seh chayim shnai mishalem. But if what he stole, whether an ox or an ass or a sheep, is found alive in his possession, he pays double. So this is the law. Double if you'll find out. By the way, if the person wants to return it and he's not caught, he can just pay once. He just gives it back. But if he's found out, then he pays either double or 4 or 5 times. Okay? That's the rule. Now let's look at robbery.
Excuse me. I think it also said that if he pays back, then he doesn't have to pay any penalty. If he admits, then he doesn't pay back a penalty, right?
That was talking about Gezela.
And this is?
Oh no, sorry, I'm wrong. What are you referring to? Which Mishnah? Do you remember?
I'm not up to 10. I think it was in 9.
So let me just check it. I'm looking at my Mishnah. Hold on a second. I just want to make sure. Hold on a minute.
Somewhere in 9 it said that if he admits, then he doesn't pay I was thinking towards the end of 9, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm looking, but 9 is about Gezel.
It was before about if the father.
Yeah. Yes, you are 100% right. Chapter 9, Mishnah 5. You are up with your studies, and that indeed is talking about Geneva. That's what I said. If he admits and says wants to give back the item, he just gives back the item. Okay?
I joined late, I'm sorry. So here we're discussing what?
Okay, so what I've basically been saying is, what I've established is that there are really two different types. One is called Geneva and one is called Gzela. Okay, and so we've just read the psukim about Geneva. Now let's see Gzela. Okay, this is now not in Shemot, not in the book of Exodus. It's actually in the book of Leviticus. God said to Moshe, saying, you've got the Hebrew, you've got the English here. Nefesh ki techata umal amal b'Hashem. Somebody sins. They commit a trespass against God. What do? V'kichesh ba'amito b'pikadon or b'tzumet yad or b'gezel or ashakit amito. They deny kichesh, right? They deny. Let's say you say, I lent you, I lent you my, you know, remember you needed a spare laptop? I lent you my laptop. And I say, no, you didn't, right? Or you say, oh, do you remember I gave you my Shabbos candlesticks to look after while I was on vacation? And you say, no, you never gave me the Shabbos candlesticks. Now, the thing is, I wanted to take them because I like them. So I'm just denying it ever happened. And you might think you're going mad. But I've denied it, okay? Or begezer, or ashakitamito. So I've defrauded you, I've robbed you. Now, I'm already going to tell you basically the difference between robbery and stealing. Stealing is when I do it and I don't want anybody to find out. Stealing means I pickpocketed somebody, I didn't want to be found out. And generally in that situation, a robber wants to get rid of the stuff as quickly as possible. Wants to get rid of the stolen goods. So for example, my wife was once in Machne Yehuda and her wallet was stolen. And she came home, she said, my wallet's gone, my credit cards, everything. We went and canceled everything. And 2 hours later, somebody gave us a call and they said, we found your wallet. And we said, well, where is it? She said, I don't know, but I found it in the public toilets in Machne Yehuda. What happened? Somebody stole the wallet. They took out all the cash and they had nothing to do with the credit card. They knew they wouldn't work. They didn't want any of my wife's stuff. They just wanted the cash, right? So that's a ganav. Okay, that's a ganav. They steal. They want to dispose of the wallet and they want to dispose of the cash. They took what they could. They've got rid of it. What's a gazlan? A gazlan is a situation where you have a violent society. And I take something from you and I keep it. And you say, well, I want it back. And you say, well, fight me, challenge me, sue me, do whatever you like. This is an environment in which, maybe I'll give you an example of this. If you look in chapter 10, let's go down and look at chapter 10. I think it's chapter 10. Yeah. Natlu mochsim et chamoro, but natnu lo chamor acher. Natnu listin et ksuto, but natnu lo ksut acher. You've got basically tax collectors, and tax collectors take stuff. They don't, in those times, these are Roman tax collectors or whatever it is. The Mishnah is being written when the Romans are an occupying force. The Romans come along and they say, we're going to take this and this. They don't check that the rate is correct. They take all sorts of things they shouldn't take. Effectively, they're taking your stuff and they are going to hold on to it. So let's say, for example, they took a donkey, but they gave me somebody else's donkey. Now, the likelihood is they took that donkey from the guy down the road. Yeah, it doesn't belong to them. They're taking everybody's stuff, right? Gazlulistimik suto. If there are violent bandits, there are highwaymen, and they took his clothing, his coat, and they give him another coat, right? That's the sort of example we're talking about. Or if you look at the next Mishnah, hold on. No, that's not it. 1 second, I know what I'm looking for. I know what I'm looking for. Why can't I find it? Yeah, look at Mishnah number 5 here. Hagozel sademi chaverov anatlu mesikin. I stole a field. You can't steal a field and what does that mean? It means I go up to you and I say, I'm a violent criminal. And I turn around to you, maybe you owe me money or something, and I say, fine, I'm taking your field. If you ever come back to this field, I'm going to kill your daughter, right? So what do you say? All right, I won't go in the field. I care about my daughter. Violent criminals. A man stole a field from his fellow, and then more violent criminals took it from him. So I'm an innocent person. That guy over there, we'll call him Frederick, took my field. And now John takes it from Frederick, right? But we've got a violent society where people are, this is in the open. This is just a violent society, okay? That's the difference between Gazlan and Ganav. Which seems worse? Gazlan seems much worse, right? Gazlan is a violent, we're talking about mafia people. We're talking about terrible, open criminals who will, threaten you and drive off with your car or take your whatever. We don't, thank God, we live in a lawful society. Thank God we don't know of such things. But we're basically talking about protection rackets and extortion. That's Gazlan. In that case, by the way, the Gazlan holds on to the stuff. They don't dispose of it. And that's why Toveach u'mocher, right? The idea that they want to sell it or they want to slaughter it doesn't exist. They take your sheep and they take your sheep and it's part of their herd. That's the Gazlan. A Ganav is somebody who's doing it on the quiet. He doesn't want anybody to find out, right? And he's less likely to hold on to it. He's going to try and sell it off, or he's going to try and eat it quickly, and he's going to try and, that's what he's going to do, right? What do they tell you nowadays? If your cell phone is taken, you phone the police, and they'll say, "Look, forget it. It's already on its way to, wherever it is." Right? They've pawned it off in a pawnbroker's shop or whatever it is. Right? I just read an article from a British newspaper of somebody who got their cell phone stolen in London, and it was tracked down 2 weeks later somewhere in Shanghai. There's a racket. They pickpocket phones, iPhones, and they sell them on to China, and they reprogram them, and but they're not in the country, so they're not going to get caught. That's Gazlan. Okay.
Gezel, Gezel was how the society by Noach was described.
Right. That's Batim Alei Haaretz Hamas. Right. That's Hamas.
And Rashi writes it was Gezel.
Right, violent crime, right? And that's exactly the way Rashi reads the end of chapter 6, or the beginning of chapter 6, where it says that law, the forces of law, says that the Bnei HaElohim came against the Benot Adam, that men were sort of taking other people's wives, and they were saying, "You're going to come with me," and raping them and whatever it is, and nobody could stop them because they were the law, because they were the people who had power. There's nothing you can do. Just nothing you could do. So that is the story of Gazlanim as opposed to Ganavim. Okay? Now in the Torah, by the way, I have to add one other thing. If I go back to our source in Vayikra, here they're talking about a case where it's not a violent society in that sense, but a Jew does it. And it says, or for example, I find a lost item, right? And when you come and confront me, I deny it, right? V'nishbal sheker, and I took an oath falsely. When I sinned and I feel guilty, I still got the item. I feel bad. You gave me your laptop to look after. You gave me your candlesticks to look after, and I never returned them, and I made up a fib. I made up a lie. So eventually I feel bad about it. It gets close to Yom Kippur. I feel bad. I want to give it back, but I sworn by God's name. So what do? I pay back the item itself, but I add another fifth. I add 20% or 25%. Why? And I bring a korban asham. Why? Because I've abused God's name. Okay? So basically that's the rule. The rule is that for Geneva, if you admit it, you just give back the item. If you get caught, you pay double. If it's an ox or a sheep, you pay 4 or 5. in gezel, you only give back the item. There's no kefel, there's no nothing. If you swore falsely, then you have to pay an extra fifth, which is really an extra quarter, and bring a korban. That's the rule. Now the Gemara wants to know, and this is where we get on to page 2, source 4, the Gemara in Bava Kamma. I'm going to read in the Hebrew just one line because it's not in the English. Amri v'kiven dera'u gazlanhu. Just because you saw him, he is a gazlan. How kiven dekam mitamrei minayu. Since he hides from him, ganavu. So what are we saying here? That the definition of a ganav is mitamrei minayu, that somebody who hides from you. Oh, ve'ela gazlan heichidami. What is a gazlan? Right? How would you find a robber, a gazlan? Said Rabbi Avo, for example, like Benaiah, the son of Yehoyada. What's that? That comes from Shmuel, where it says, and he plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and slew him with his own spear. So if you're grabbing things out of somebody's hand and you're dangerous enough that you might want to hurt him, that is called a gazlan. Rabbi Yochanan said, like the men of Shechem in the story of Avimelech, where we read, the men of Shechem set out ambushes on the top of the hills, Vayigzalu. And here you see the word ligzol, right? Vayigzalu. Here also you see the word ligzol. Vayigzol et hachanit. So they're looking for a biblical proof. Vayigzol. Vayigzalu et kol asher ya'avor alehem baderech. So we're talking about bandits. That's what we're talking about. Rabbi Avahu, why didn't he use the pasuk of Rabbi Yochanan? Right? He says, since they were in ambush, they're not gazlanim. A gazlan has to do it in the open, not to hide. And Rabbi Yochanan said, no. All they were doing was they were hiding themselves so that they could do a more effective ambush. Whichever way, a gazlan is somebody who does it in the open. A ganav does it on the quiet. Now, you'd expect a gazlan to be far more serious and have a stricter penalty than a ganav, but the opposite is the case, and the Gemara is curious about this. So, Sha'alu Talmidam at Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The students asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Ma hichmira Torah beganav yoter mi begazlan. Why is the Torah more severe on a thief than a robber? Right? The thief does it on the quiet. The robber does it in the open. He is a dangerous criminal. The other guy is a coward. So, what's going on here? Amalahem, he says, Zeh hishveh kavod eved lekavod kono. V'zeh lo yishvu eved kavod eved lekavod kono. In other words, I'll put it in our language. The ganav is afraid of human beings, but he's not afraid of God. He's willing to cheat human beings, but he knows he's doing something wrong. In fact, he's going to actually take the lost object and try and dispose of it quickly. Whereas the gazlan is at least honest. And he's somebody who, honest, I wouldn't call it honest, but he is has the same standard towards everybody. He's open about it. V'zeh hishveh kavod kono lekavod and he says, Kaviyachol, I'll read it in English, it's a little easier. He says, sorry, I'm totally lost it here. Kaviyachol ayin shalmat kilu eina ro'eh, v'ozen shalmat kilu eina shalmat. As if to say that God doesn't see and God doesn't know. Okay? And they quote a verse here, which we say in the Shir Shel Yom, Lo yireya v'lo yavin Elohei Yaakov. So there's something bad about the ganav, that the ganav thinks that God can't see, whereas the gazlan does a crime in the open. And they give a lovely parable. It was taught, Rabbi Meir said, the following parable is reported in the name of Ram Gamliel. What do the thief and the robber resemble? Two people who dwelt in one town and made banquets. One invited the townspeople and didn't invite the royal family. They invited the commoners, but not royalty. The royalty are very offended. The other didn't invite, he had a wedding, and he didn't invite the townspeople, nor the royal family. Which deserves the heavier punishment? Surely the one who invited the townspeople, but not invite the royal family. The Ganav ignores God, but he cares what people think of him. The Gazlan doesn't care what anybody thinks of him. Okay? And therefore, now I have to say that clearly part of the question here is a question of, remember, we're not just dealing with punishment here. We're dealing with punishment which can bring a person to a state of restitution, to a place whereby they do tshuva. The idea is that when you actually do this payment, you are, so to speak, clearing your account with God. And therefore they say, fine, if you're out there in the open, okay, then what you have to do is you have to give back the object. But somebody who committed this crime and thought they could somehow cheat God, he apparently needs a more severe process of repair. Now, let's just go into the next bit of the Gemara, and then we'll take questions. But I want to just finish talking about Arba v'chamisha. We said that for an ox, if you take the ox and slaughter it, you pay 5 times. And if you have the sheep, you pay 4 times. Why is a sheep at a lower rate than the ox? And here we're going to see 2 opinions, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Meir. Okay? Amar Rabbi Meir, Bo ra'ei kama gadol koach shel melacha. Look how Judaism respects work. Shor shebit lo melachto. An ox is like a farm tractor. The ox pulled the plow. The ox would pull the wagon. So the ox actually has a use on the farm beyond. It helps the farmer to be able to work. It's, as I say, like the tractor. It plows the field and ever. They say, Bore kama gadol koach shel melacha. Shor shebit lo melachto. When somebody steals an ox, they're stopping the ox from working. Chamisha. What does a sheep do all day? Sits in the field. Doesn't do very much with itself. Eats grass, gets fat, grows its wool. It's not exactly working. So they say, wow, look at this. If you took an ox, not only have you stolen something which you should pay 4 times for, you get an extra penalty. Why? Because the Torah values labor. It values progress. It values the idea of work. Work is a Jewish value. And therefore, if you took an ox, not only do you pay restitution double times double, right? An ox, by the way, and slaughter it, but you add an extra fine because you stopped this animal from working. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had a different lens. He says, Borei kama gadol kvod habriot. No, it's not about the ox working. It's actually about people's dignity. Shor shahalach baraglav chamisha seshe kivot ktefo arba'a. Says usually you should have to pay 5, but you get a reduction for a sheep. Why? Because how do you steal an ox? It walks itself. But how do you take a sheep? You have to put it on your shoulder, right? And that's a little embarrassing to take an animal on your shoulder, right? So they give you a reduction in payment because of the indignity of having to carry this sheep over your shoulder. Fascinating, right? Fascinating. They're trying to probe why it is that when I steal an ox, I pay more, and when I steal a sheep, I pay less. And this was the option they came up with. Well, I just love the way that this sort of, even within the sphere, we're dealing with criminals and we're dealing with people who are wrong. Obviously, we're dealing with the case where a person who is a criminal wants to make amends or is forced to make amends, and yet it's amazing how these values of work, values of embarrassment, right? By the way, I want to point out, if you remember, what we learned in our last class. These were very important factors in personal injury: embarrassment, whether you can work. So actually what's behind Masechet Bava Kamma is that we value somebody's productivity. We value somebody's dignity, right? And that can be applied both to the victim and even to the criminal, okay? So that is pretty much was my introduction, looking at the difference between Gneva and Gzela. I'll summarize again, and then we'll take some questions. Let me just stop the share for a second. So let's just summarize so far. Chapter 7 deals with Geneva. Chapter 9 and 10 deal with Gzela. Chapter 7, Geneva, is when you steal something and don't want to be found out. And that is seen as more severe than the case in chapter 9 and 10, which is some sort of like mafia situation where law has broken down and where people are publicly extorting one another. Right? In the case of Geneva, if you steal and you get caught, you pay double. In the case of Gzela, you just give back the item. In the case of Gzela, if you denied it and took an oath, you end up paying a fifth and bringing a korban because you've offended God by taking his name in vain. In the case of Geneva, you have to return double the value if you're caught. And if you have, how we said, you want to dispose of the animal, you don't want people to know. So either you slaughtered it or you sold it on. If you slaughtered it and sold it on and now it's gone down the food chain and you don't know how to find it and you can't give it back, you have to actually pay 4 times for a sheep, 5 times for an ox. And that's what we have there. Yeah, that's a summary. Questions?
I'd like to highlight something from Yasmin in the chat asking a few minutes ago, is this similar to the Latin rapare, quote, to seize? Because that can also apply violence. Yasmin, if you can step in and just like you recap what this was in reference to, because this was a few minutes back.
Yeah, we were talking about Geneva versus Gzela, and you were talking about how Gzela is more of a violent crime. And I was wondering if this is similar, like if I don't know how long ago when they were probably translating these things, would they have used that word?
I have no idea. My Latin is very rusty since I studied it when I was about 14 in high school. So I can try and look it up, but I have no clue. But it is I do find it fascinating that the Mishnah seems to relate to all sorts of circumstances in which this seems to have been the norm, where you had violent, unscrupulous sources who would simply take a liking to something that you had and simply, basically say, this is an offer you can't refuse. And we're taking it and go take me on and we'll burn your house down. We really can't imagine such a thing. But I know that, for example, in Israel, unfortunately, there are these terrible protection rackets in the Bedouin community. And they literally enforce protection money. And if you don't agree to pay them, my daughter lived up north near Kiryat Shmona a few years ago. And there was one day where there was a terrible forest fire. And it burnt down like a couple of miles of a forest up in the north between something called Somet Koach and Kiryat Shmona. And later on, when it came to light, what it was arson. And what it was there was a sort of like a shopping center, small shopping area there. And these local gangs had basically told them they had to pay protection money and they refused. And basically, as a warning, they burnt down the entire forest around them and said, basically, you'll be next. So, that if it can happen today, when we have police and we have maids of it, all the more so, if you're a poor farmer living on your farm and somebody comes along and threatens that they'll burn down your barn, so that seems to be a part of the brutality of the 2nd century when the Mishnah is being written. That's what there is. So 2nd, 3rd century. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. Was there a time when there were gangs like that? I mean, if the Mishnah is writing about it, was that?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Look, we know in the Second Temple period in Jerusalem, there are people called the Sikari, right? And the Sikari, I think Sikari is a knife, right? And basically they were violent thugs, or maybe ideological violent thugs, but they were violent. And this seems to have continued. They talk about all sorts of, the Gemara is always talking about listim, highwaymen. We don't need to watch Pirates of the Caribbean. We know that things were dangerous, right? You You had people who were highwaymen, you were vulnerable. Now we say Tfilat HaDerech, we're worried about, we're worried about people who, about car accidents. But then they were worried about highwaymen and being attacked. There's a Mishnah in Brachot which says that when you go into a city, you say, let me enter this city in peace. And when you get through the gates of the city, you say, thank God that I got into the city in peace. And when you leave the city, you say, please let me leave the city in peace. And when you leave, you say, thank God I left the city in peace. What's that about? It's that you're coming in contact, you're at the gates of the city, the authorities are there, those tax collectors. And who knows whether they're, they want to pocket a little bit of stuff, they want to take a few bribes, right? You hear about this in third world countries. You hear about this in the Soviet bloc, unscrupulous people who will, they are officially the law, but they will do all sorts of awful things. So we who live in the West, we live in pretty, thank God, pretty legal environments. It's difficult for us to imagine, but I think maybe we're the anomaly in history.
And then I wanted to ask you, there was a Mishnah I had difficulty with. I don't know if you were going to do it. It was that if a person tells his father that he swears that he didn't borrow something or he didn't get something from him, and then he decides, yes, his father really had given him something and he wants to return it, but the father is now dead. So if he would return it, it would go into the pot of the inheritance. So he would really be giving it back to himself, but he can't.
Right.
So it describes some like really convoluted thing about he should borrow the money, so it goes to his brothers, and then when they come to collect it, they collect it from.
Yeah, exactly. You're describing it exactly. You're reading the Mishnah 100% correctly. I think you've described it well. That's exactly what they're talking about.
But that struck me as a real dray of a dray.
It is a bit of a dray. It's what we call a legal fiction. But sometimes legal fictions work.
Okay. So I got it right.
It's a technicality. It's a technical way of paying it back, even though he will get certain side benefits from it.
Okay. So, I mean, like it's a legal fiction.
To some degree, but what he's trying to do is he's trying to do his spiritual due of paying back this extra chamishit, this fifth, but he can't pay it back to himself, so he needs to pay it to his brothers. So he finds a way in order to do that. Yes, it's a bit of a legal fiction. Natan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rav. I did the Masechet. I did the Masechet Gittin a few months ago with Drisha, and the secret cone comes up there, and I'm still behind on Bava Kamma. I'm about to start the 8th parak. Does that Mishnah get repeated? And if so, why not?
Right, so there's a whole thing about the sikrikon there. Yeah, you're right. The sikari.
Does it apply? Isn't it the case of Nezikin? Why does it get mentioned there or not there? I know that sometimes mishnayot get repeated, and sorry if this question is beyond the time that we have.
Right, it's not exactly the same. You know what? I'm now, unfortunately, sort of a bit forgetting the Mishnah in Gittin. I know the reference, but I'm not up to scratch with exactly that. But the Mishnah I mentioned, I'll go back to the sheet. The Mishnah I mentioned in the last parak, I read it before, Mishnah 5. Okay, Hagozel sademech havero. If you steal a field from somebody else, well, not lu masikim. Here they call them masikim, not sikrikin. It's interesting. Okay, so I took a field from you. Okay, I extorted. I said, you're not going back in your field. I'm taking your field for this year. Right? I'll burn your house down if you take it. Right? So, and I intend to use it for a couple of years and to move on. Okay? And then somebody more violent than me takes it from me. Right? A visiting army or something like that. Who knows? They say, Imakat Medinahu. If it is a whole district suffered, right? So if everybody's getting their fields taken, suddenly the Romans come along and they seize everybody's fields in this particular district of the Galil. What do? You say, here, have your field back. I don't have a field, you don't have a field, take your field back. However, if the only reason why they took this field was because it was mine, I took it from you, but now they know that I'm a criminal, so now they took it from me, right? Then, even though I'm a criminal, I have to repay you back. But if there was a flood and now, my trees go down the river, right? I say, right, it's your field. Whether I had it or whether you had it, right, it would have been yours. So there's this very complicated situation of when I am actually in the state of, and this is, the Mishnah spends a lot of time talking about this, that if I am a gazlan, I've taken your stuff, to what degree is it mine, right? Or to what degree is it still yours, right? And what exactly are the conditions of each, right? Because I shouldn't legally really own it, but I'm acting as if I do. And at what point do I have to make restitution to you, or do you say, well, something happened to it, but it would have happened anyway? Okay, but you've got a good question. You have to go and check out, the Mishnah Gittin and look at what's going on here. And I wonder if there are particular, in the Mishnah sometimes there are interesting questions about editing, how these mishnayot got put together, and there were maybe different batei midrash, which created different batches, different Tanaitic schools, and maybe if you look at some of the academic perushim, one of the academic perushim is the Albeck commentary or the Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. Mishnat Eretz Yisrael is actually all on Sefaria for free. And it's a sort of academic commentary which tries to really explain things within the historical context, a lot of archaeology, botany, realia. And you can look at it, on I think it's either on Sefaria or on Ala Torah, on one of those, I think, or maybe on both of them. So if you look in Mishnah Eretz Yisrael on both of the Mishnayot, and the whole case of these sikrikin, or as they call them here, masikin, maybe you'll find something which relates to the Mishnah in Gittin versus the Mishnah here.
When was that written?
What?
When was that written?
Hanoch Albeck, I don't know quite when he wrote it. Hanoch Albeck is one of the most important academic scholars of Mishnah and Talmud. His masterpiece is actually his introduction to the Mishnah. I'm not quite sure which year it was written, but it could have been written in the 40s or something, 40s, 50s. Mishnat Eretz Yisrael was done by the Safrai family, I think, over the last 10 to 20 years. It's been a masterwork that they've worked on, and it's called Mishnat Eretz Yisrael because they want to absorb a lot of the knowledge, archaeological, philological, the realia that we've sort of uncovered through modern archaeology and through all sorts of academic discoveries, and also as the academic knowledge grows and more is uncovered, so their interest is in using all of that and bring it to bear in a commentary on the Mishnah. I think they might have just finished Shas in the Mishnah Eretz Yisrael, or maybe they're still doing it, but it's been in process for years and years. I think the people who did it are the Safrais, and maybe I'm remembering wrong, but I think the person who started it passed away, and his children or his wife or somebody carried it on. I can't remember what the story was. Lise.
So I just want to understand, this is a simple question, but the main difference between the thief and the robber is the hiddenness, and specifically the desire to be hidden before God. So even though the crime of stealing somebody's land and threatening to burn down their farm and their house is overtly seems like a much worse crime, that the Mishnah sees it as a somewhat lesser crime because it's done overtly. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it's not only the Mishnah, it's the Torah. In other words, the Torah is the one who talks about the idea that when I take somebody's cow and then I slaughter it or I eat it, then I pay 4 or 5 times, right? But the Torah says that in the case of a gazlan, where I'm actually confronted, right, and then I and then I regret it afterwards, then I confront it, I say, what are you talking about? I don't have it, or whatever it is. Then I just give the item back, and if I use God's name, so in other words, the difference between Gezeilah and Geneva is already in the Torah, and the Mishnah just has to create different schemes of rules, but the basic difference is already there in the Torah.
But taking somebody's ox is much different than burning down their house.
Well, I was just trying to create the scenario. It doesn't actually say that. It means that somebody comes to me and they say, you've got my laptop, and I say, so what? Primary school, somebody steals your favorite pen, and you say, give me back my pen. They said, no, it's mine. And if they say, no, it's mine, you say, well, do you want to fight me for it? That happens in elementary school. That's Gazlan. He's not denying that he's got the pen. He's telling you can't have it. Right? I think that's Gazlan. It just happens on a more adult scale in more severe crimes. So that's the situation. Okay, I want to just deal with a couple of other things because we are really running out of time. So let me just say something at the end of chapter 7. I just wanted to make people aware of this very interesting Mishnah. This is not to do with directly to do with Gazlan or Ganav, but I thought this was lovely. Since the Mishnah there is talking about sheep and oxen, we see a Mishnah which is to do with Eretz Yisrael at the end of chapter 7. Ein megadlin behima daka be'eretz Yisrael. You don't rear small animals in Eretz Yisrael, small herd animals. Megadlin b'Suria, but you can raise them in Suria. Suria was like attached to the land of Israel. Of midbarot be'eretz Yisrael. So the worry is somehow that if you have herds of goats, they will destroy the landscape, and therefore you shouldn't raise herds of goats. Where can you raise them? Out in the Midbar. Midbar doesn't mean desert. It means more wilderness. It means places where there are no fields. Okay? And it continues and says, actually, before we get there, let me just point something out about that. First of all, something contemporary. We're talking about Mishnat Eretz Yisrael. It is an interesting thing that if you, what color are goats? So most time when you go around Israel, you will see goats, and goats are white or a light brown, a beige color, brown goats. Actually, the goats in Eretz Yisrael used to be black. Why don't we have black goats in Eretz Yisrael anymore? Anybody know?
Black wool's not profitable.
Good question. That's a good theory. But actually, it's not true. The British banned them. The British banned them because they were destroying the countryside of the land. And I once went on a tour of an area just over the Green Line. It was an area called Wadi Fukin. And Wadi Fukin is it's actually a UNESCO site. It's near Beitar. And it's a UNESCO site because it preserves ancient agriculture, with farming it's got all different springs in the area, and the spring it's trailed into different channels, and the channels go into this field and this field and this field. It's actually like mishnayot farming, and because this has sort of remained relatively untouched. Anyway, we went on this tour there, and they started telling us why the Green Line is called the Green Line. The border between 48 Israel and 67 Israel is called the Green Line. And they say, why is it that you can even look on a map and you see that there is forestation on the Israel side and there is no forestation on the West Bank side? What happened? So, of course, it's because the JNF decided to plant trees. But the thing is, if you leave a field for 100 years, eventually trees will grow there. Birds will drop seeds and trees will grow there. What happened? And they said is because whenever you have the little saplings of trees, what happens is the shepherds come along with their sheep and they munch at all the small saplings. And even it doesn't allow that early stage right, from when things sort of bud out of the ground as a sapling to become a real tree. Everything is destroyed at that very early stage, and it deforests the entire landscape. Okay, so this is the idea that Ein Megadlim Behema Daka Eretz Yisrael, that for the Eretz Yisrael should be forested and should have greenery, and therefore you don't want herds of goats in the main area of Eretz Yisrael. They can go out into the Midbar, into the less populated areas. But Syria, which is sort of adjacent to Israel, but not part of Israel, we don't really care about. And then the Mishnah continues and says, Ein megadlim tarnagolim b'Yerushalayim mipnei hakodshim. You don't raise chickens or roosters in Jerusalem mipnei hakodashim. And the assumption was that the roosters would peck at all different things, and they would somehow even peck at little insects or shuratzim, or maybe peck at lizards and things like that, and that generates tumah, and then there'd be tumah lying in the yards, and people might step on it, and therefore, because Jerusalem is a place in temple times where people were coming to Jerusalem in order to engage with the temple, and they wanted to be holy, they wanted to be able to gain access, they didn't want to become impurified. For this reason, they didn't raise chickens in public areas in Jerusalem. And priests who need to always be handling holy food like Truma Maser did not raise chickens. Right? You don't raise pigs in Eretz Yisrael. It's inappropriate. And last one, Lo yigadel adam et hakelev. Don't raise dogs. Elim ken haya kashur b'shalshelet. Dogs need to be on a leash, right? And the last one, Ein porsim nishpim leyonim elim ken haya rachok min hayishuv shloshim ris. Right? You can't make traps for pigeons. The assumption is that pigeons are domesticated animals. They belong to somebody. They are not wild, and therefore you can't trap or take other people's pigeons unless they are 30 ris, which is about 10 miles from another populated place. And I just find this, we spoke about realia before, a fascinating piece of realia about the effects of these different animals on the landscape of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, we're going to leave it here because our time is up. There's lots more to say, an endless amount to say about this, about these prakim. I hope you finding them fascinating. I love some of the prakim here, especially the ones which say, I gave my wool to the guy to dye it, and he dyed it the wrong color, and can I get, how do I exactly pay, and what if it came out actually a nicer color, or if it came out a less nice color, but I still don't want it. And I love all those cases where, and again, it's interesting to think about whether this comes more under the category of Geneva or Gazela. But we will leave all of that for now. I will thank you for learning with me, and lehitraot. I hope we get a chance to meet, not through a Zoom screen, but face to face at some point. And toda rabba, and batzlacha with all your learning of Mishnah. Very excited to be in the company of fellow Mishnah learners. I'm currently learning. Last week I went to the Goldberg Poland Shiva for her. She was killed, one of the hostages, and they are actually doing 3 sets of shas. So the Mishnahs that I actually am learning at the moment, I'm learning in his memory. So that is, as one of the 3 cycles of shas that they have set up. So that's what I'm up to with my Mishnah learning at the moment. Toda rabba, lehitraot, and b'hatzlacha with Masechet Baba Metzia. I hope you all realize that the end of Baba Kamma is literally going into Baba Metzia, where Baba Metzia, one of the questions are, if I find something has the original owner given up hope on ever getting it back. And those themes are already creeping in at the end of Baba Kamma. So that supports again the idea that Baba Kamma, Baba Metzia, and Baba Batra are really one big Masechet, right? And there aren't stark lines between them. So the fact that with Gzela, one of the factors is whether one of the factors is whether the original person has given up hope of ever getting it back. You're going to see that coming in the first parak of Bava Metzia, which you're going to do next week.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi Israel. There are other classes starting this week and many more options at drisha.org/classes. It has been a pleasure learning Mishnah with you all, and take care.